speciesism. This is the Portland Zoo in Oregon. My family lives in Corvallis. This is the elephant enclosure. I'm no fan of zoos. And this is the elephant enclosure, and these are elephants who are actually trying to play, but it's incredibly difficult. This is one of my examples of speciesism that I think is ultimately connected to those little girls. That's ultimately connected to that crackhead. All right. So what I'd like to do is tell a story about the importance of facts. This is a kind of personal story, but my hope is that you'll see how it may intersect with a number of the issues that are relevant to both Green Party politics and also, indeed, the future of a livable planet. I should warn you, however, that some really popular concepts in my story are not going to come out well, right? So I'm preparing to offend you at this point. Some of the concepts that are not going to come out all that well here our concepts are words like activism, sustainability, which I think is entirely co-opted at this point. The word progressive isn't going to come out all that well. Liberal is not going to come out all that well, and feminist is not going to come out all that well. Sorry. Okay, so here we go. The story begins with me and my camera, and that monstrous pathology of capitalism called hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. I had this idea that if I could just show people just what this infrastructure looked like, the pads, the wells, the trucks, the tankers, the roads, the parking lots, the dust, the denuded hillsides, the flattened mountaintops, the dead wildlife, the nasty carcinogenic spills, the anger, the polluted waterways, the divided communities, the ruptures, the noise, the oily sheen on your water, the particulate matter, the cancers, and the asthma. Right, they're ready to show you. Right, that was my whole goal in starting taking all these pictures. That if I could get folks to just see with their own eyes the damn damage, right, backed up by comprehensive, thoroughly documented descriptions of the dangers, right, from my research, that this would generate righteous outrage, right, and that the righteous outrage would be so great that it would help galvanize a loud, resolute movement of civil rights-style, nonviolent insurgency, compelling governments, township by township, county by county, state by state, to outlaw what was so obviously a blight on the very conditions of life. Right, so, next picture. Okay, yeah. So, this is from the Climate March in New York City. Right, various estimates of the attendance between 200 and 400,000. It was very crowded. It was really cool to be there. This was one of the folks in one of the signs that I thought actually illustrated this point about the capitalist scene quite neatly. Okay, all right. So I set out, with my cameras. I climbed hills, I run roads, I irritated the bejeebers out of cranky security guards, and I shot about 4,000 pictures of gasholia, which is what we call it affectionately in Pennsylvania, gasholia. I uploaded them to Facebook. I uploaded them to Flickr. I took these pictures on the road. I made big posters out of them. I took them to talks. I blew them up, right, as in made the bigger. I went to hearings. I took shots of anxious elected people in order to shame them, and for voting for more gas rigs, right, in order to shame them. I weathered a joint FBI, state police eco-terrorism investigation that brought an officer named Michael Hudson to my house on Valentine's Day of 2014. Yeah, to my house. This is my house, like out in rural Pennsylvania, right, where I just own an old farmhouse on a little street, and all my neighbors, right, are looking at this big black van that's parked in front of my house with all the windows tinted out. So I ended up having to have the guy come in so my neighbors would not be gawky. Okay, so there he is, and he's like, well, could we look around? No, I don't think so. And he's there, I totally kid you not, to ask me about pipe bombs. Like what I knew about pipe bombs, which I really want to make sure we're clear. I don't know jack about pipe bombs. I told him at the time, I said, look, I could, bake a pipe bomb, or I could bake a cake. The pipe bomb would be more edible, and it would taste better. That's what I know about pipe bombs. Right, but he was there for about 45 minutes. scaring me, essentially. Right? This is how dissent is silenced. Right? It's not because they had anything. This is just how dissent is silenced. Because protest in the United States, right? We talk a good game about the democracy and the protest, right? But we don't. You're not supposed to use those rights. You're supposed to think that you have them, but you're not supposed to actually take them on the road and try them out. Okay, so that's what he was there for. Okay. Next picture. Just back up a little bit. Okay. So here in Pennsylvania, you can compressor station, you can frackety frack on state game lands, state forest lands. This is Tyodotin State Forest. It is beautiful. It's just outside of Williamsport, Pennsylvania. It was really beautiful. And it's one of the United States' most contiguous, uninterrupted chunks of forest until the gas came. It is also home to the endangered eastern flying squirrel. Right? So that's pipeline, of course. Right? There's a compressor station back behind those trees. And you can see just the dust rising from the road, right? That's our state game land 75. Okay, so, all right, let's see. At least in Pennsylvania, here's what happened. I took all these pictures. I thought that this would be a contribution to the revolution, right? That was my one little piece, right? That was my job, my thing that I could do, right? I was taking these pictures and I was writing about them. I write this really incendiary blog called The Wrench, right? And I'm just writing. So I wait thinking, people are going to go, right? They're going to get mad, right? The movement is coming. And then it never happened. Not in Pennsylvania. The insurgency just didn't materialize. To be very clear, this is not to say that there aren't very real heroes in Pennsylvania, right? And lots of places. Of course there are. Next picture. We'll talk about this one in just a second. It's not to say that I thought the photographs could have that, singular an effect all by themselves. Right? It's not that I thought I was fomenting a revolution on my own. It's not to say that there haven't been loads of people who've taken some real risks, right? There absolutely have. And to be fair, the odds are stacked against states like Pennsylvania, where the laws that govern municipalities make fomenting insurrection particularly difficult. Because municipalities in PA they're called second class. It's all second class, which is really all you need to know. Which means that the state can always preempt any laws that the municipalities try to erect to govern their own citizens, right? There's always state preemption. Okay, so yeah, the odds are stacked against states like Pennsylvania, where the laws that govern municipalities, right, make fomenting insurrection hard. This is, however, to say that after, at that point, 5 years of waiting, 5 years where it got harder and harder and harder to get good shots, I'll talk about that one, without risking criminal trespass, I felt compelled to step back and evaluate more carefully the question why we were not only no closer to a ban in Pennsylvania, but no nearer even to regulations that would keep drill rigs off school grounds, right, or off, the grounds where your mom and dad are retired and trying to play bingo. Right, or off the grounds of my university. Right, we got nothing. So this is what leads me to this particular photograph. So this probably isn't as obvious as some of the others, but this is a drilling mud spill. Okay, this happened on Route 220. Way out, very, very rural, very mountainous, Sullivan County, Pennsylvania, about an hour from where I live. I got a call one morning, at about 5:30 in the morning. If you get out there before the police tape, you could get onto those grounds, right? Because there's no police tape yet. And so there, a little tiny Honda, and cameras, and I drive out there, and it's like this just can't even do it justice. Right? This pipe had ruptured, and it had dumped all this drilling mud everywhere. Right, so I'm actually climbing out. You can see the pipeline. Right, can you see where the pipeline is? Mm-hmm. Right, so it's ruptured like just about this way, and I am like climbing out onto that chunk of pipeline, right? Trying to shoot so you can see the sheen on the water, right? So you can actually see how nasty that is. And that gray nasty color, that's like God knows what, right? It's called produced water. It's drilling fluids, right? So it's benzene, toluene, diesel, you know, boom. So I'm out there, and I fell in it. I fell in it. All right, so ooh. Gotta get that off, right? Gonna burn. Right, so I climb down where I know there's a creek, Little Muncie Creek, and I see it's coming right into the creek. Right, so I get down there and I wash off a little bit, and I, repossess myself. Yeah, and my camera's okay, which is what really matters. And I climb back out onto the site, and I see there's a fresh water tanker truck on the site. But the lid's off, the top's off, right? And that's odd, because it's a fresh water tanker, right? You don't want the water to get dirty, right? So the lid should be capped. And so I'm like, and I climbed up on it, because no police tape yet, no police were there yet. It's still really early in the morning. So I climbed up on top of the tanker, and I looked down, and I shot down, right? You can find these on my Flickr page, into the fresh water tanker, and it was all drilling fluids. And the smell was horrific. It's acrid. It's acidic, very acrid smelling. Right? And so they were using freshwater tankers for produced water, for drilling fluids. Right? So I dispatched all these pictures, right, to the police, right, to the Department of Environmental Protection, right. You gotta see these. Right, here's the revolution. Right, this will all stop. Look at what and then nothing happened. That spill was nasty, and within a matter of hours, you couldn't have gotten on that site at all, right, because it was police days. Okay. So, all right, next picture. We can go to the next one now. Oh yeah, isn't that beautiful? Okay, yeah, here's the police. Okay, yeah. All right, yeah, no, you can just stay right there. That's fine. That's fine. Okay. This is at the inauguration of Governor Wolf. Yeah, where I was taking the pictures of my friends being arrested, including the one in the corner that you'll see in a minute, who's a hero of mine, Maggie Henry. Okay, so next section here. I've thought about all this a lot. Obsessively, why this revolution hasn't happened, why you have a ban at least on fracking, although you've got everything else, to be honest with you, and your ban is not going to hold. I'm really sorry to tell you that, but you're going to lose it. I've thought a lot about this. Why don't we care more about our health, and why don't we care more about our kids' health, and why don't we care? And so here's just a sample, the next numbered things of what I've come up with. And what it's vitally important for me to tell you is that each item on the list I'm about to describe, I think, is connected by a single conceptual cable. Our short night, our short-sightedness, right, that's encouraged in us by a capitalist culture, and a kind of moral myopia with respect to relationships between those axes of human chauvinism, the relationships between things like racism and patriarchy and class and speciesism, all of which are exploited by capital, all of which get us this police state right here. So first, this is what we're missing in our movements. Then these next things. First, it has to do, and for me this is one of the most important and also makes me deeply unpopular, the unequal treatment of non-human animal suffering. Right? Part of what makes all of this so possible is that we don't care about the lives that live in these places. We just don't care. We don't care if they're endangered, we don't care if they're not, we just don't care. Right? And so we destroy them and they never come back, right? But we don't care. we will never gain, I would argue, any real and enduring traction against the hydrocarbon extraction industries, right, or any of the other, like the sugar industry, for example, until we see that the fight against fracking is the fight to end animal agriculture, right? That they're the same fight, that they have to be the same fight. While there's much dispute about which is the greatest greenhouse gas emitter, the facts are stunningly clear on this point, and here's where facts really matter. We could drive our stretch Hummers until the cows, quite literally, came home, and it won't make one whit of difference curbing CO2 or methane emissions until we shutter the factory farms. We end the industrialized dairies, and we put an end to animal agriculture. Even if we don't care about the suffering, right, which we should, we ought to, but even if we don't care about that, right, we're not going to gain any traction, right? There's no point in being a member of an anti-fracking movement if you're going to go out afterwards and get a pile of bacon at Denny's. Sorry. Yeah. All right, moreover, I'd argue we're hypocrites. Every time we hold up a sign on the steps of a Capitol building decrying the damage to human health of the gas industry, only to retire to bacon burgers at a local eatery. And if we protest that the meat's like free range or organic, still hypocrites. Since even if we put the animal suffering aside, there's no way the planet can sustain free range and feed more than the tiny number of affluent, mostly white Westerners who can afford it. Most importantly, however, for me, is that if we're serious about being a credible movement that claims to care about suffering, we need to act like we care about suffering. And that means working just as hard to end animal culture as fracking or mountaintop removal or tar sands extraction. Because they're all really the same. And we can go down a couple. And so, there's the police officers at Tom Wolf's inauguration. Tom Wolf, a Democrat, right, who we appealed to in Pennsylvania over and over and over again to ban fracking. I've been deeply critical of Governor Wolf, and even more critical of the anti-fracking organizations who continue to donate money to him. I think they should be ashamed of themselves, actually. And you're not going to find me saying anything nice about the Sierra Club, the Environmental Defense Fund, or the World Wildlife Federation for the same reasons. Hey, this person over here is Maggie Henry. Maggie Henry, she had never been arrested in her life. She's in her mid-60s. She actually owns a dairy farm. And she was at this inauguration crying because she knew she was going to be arrested because she wasn't going to stand down. She wasn't going to stop calling out Wolf's name when she was instructed to do so by that delightful state police officer. Right, so she was arrested, and she's standing there crying, and I'm just back far enough just to get the shot off without getting snagged by the handcuffs. Right, because it's hard to take pictures when you're cuffed. Okay, all right, right next to it, this is also Ty Dotton State Forest, and that's pipeline coming right out of the forest, right on a trail. The Pesto Trail to Love Run, which is a naturalized area with a pipeline running through it. And we still call that naturalized. Yeah. So there you go. That's hiking trail right there. Okay, let's see. All right, second. Part of what we're missing in our movements is that the appeal to sustainability, I'd argue. We appeal to the concept of sustainability as if a planet roasted by climate change weren't still sustainable. Right? We could roast the planet, and it's still sustainable. It's not for us. Right? It'll just suck. Right? We can make it into a scene from Mad Max, from Thunder Road. Right? We can make it into The Walking Dead. Still sustainable. Right? Which is why sustainable is just not enough. Right? I don't know why the hell we settle for that. Okay, we use this magic word as if we believe sustainable is necessarily accompanied by, say, rich biotic diversity. Restored wilderness or social justice. But this is false. This is simply false. We can perfectly well wreck the joint for all kinds of other critters and still survive, at least for a while. Right? So I mean, that's what we're doing right now. Right? We're wrecking it for everything else. Right? We're just hoping that we'll still be around in the end. Some will. Right? We're still fossil fueling and animal carcass eating our way to an ecocidal wasteland. Right? And it will, to be sure, catch up with us eventually. And it will do immeasurable harm to many others, human and non-human, along the way. But our greatest ability, and ultimately our most self-defeating capacity, both, is one and the same, and it's our capacity to adapt. It's one of our greatest abilities as human beings, right? But it's also our greatest weakness. We will adapt, right? We're adapting right now. It's hot. Right? We'll call that sustainable. Right? But the only thing we've sustained is an economic system in whose circulation of carbons and animal bodies and water and sugar and human labor and the racist and sexist premises that ensure that it all stays really cheap, right, lay immense profits for a very, very few and increasing misery or extinction for everything else. Right? If the future of the planet isn't to be more than merely sustainable, right? If it's going to be actually desirable, something we want to leave our kids, then, you know, if we don't care more than that, what's the point of getting cranky over what we do to it now? Right? If we don't want more than that. Okay, so third, we can skip down a bit. Oh, yeah. There's a lovely photograph of a very thin cow trying to live sustainably in an increasingly ecologically deteriorated part of northern India, relatively near the border of Bhutan, but an area that has become more and more and more polluted with respect to its water resources, right? And its non-human animal life, including non-human animal life that people depend on, is becoming more and more unable to eat, unable to be sustained. Okay, so next. I think that we need to abandon the idea that progressive, the word progressive, and the word capitalist can make progress. No. So-called progressives, right, the ostensibly anti-racist, anti-sexist wing of the Democratic Party, right, who do good things, right, who demand a rise in the minimum wage, a commitment to the COP21 agreements, who oppose TPP, but yeah, you don't even want to get me on that, who stand up with Black Lives Matter and speak out for women's reproductive rights, all awesome, right, all good things. They're doomed to keep losing to both the Trumpster fascists, and the liberals in their own party, so long as we continue to believe that capitalism can be salvaged and humanized through regulation. It cannot. And here's why. Right? Here's why. 3 necessary presuppositions that govern every capitalist enterprise, even the little ones, right up, to Wally World, right up to Walmart. 3 presuppositions. 1, that its resources are endless. Every capitalist enterprise depends on this fundamental idea that it won't run out of the basic materials it needs to make its stuff, right? To make its service, to make its whatever. And the most fundamental of these resources are carbons, water, sugar, and labor. Okay? Second, all capitalist enterprises must grow or die. It's the credo. Right? Necessitating the belief that its resources are endless, right? There's no other way to grow, right, unless you can assume that your resources are endless, which is why one of their most important resources is denial. Right? Because we all know that the hydrocarbons are going to run out. Right? It's a matter of time, right? We keep developing better and better technology, right, to get deeper and deeper under the ground, to get more and more out, right? But it's going to eventually run out. And before it runs out, we may contaminate so much of our water, right? Or so much of it may be privatized so that we don't have access to it unless you have money, right? That the likelihood that the anxiety and anger will produce more and more violence and more acts of terrorism is increasingly high, right? And those 2 things are intimately connected. All you have to do is ask a Syrian farmer, right, who's now in a city that's absolutely blown to shit, why they left the countryside. Right? And they're going to tell you in 1 word, well, 2 words, drought, and the corruption in trying to get a well dug, to get to water that used to be 7 feet, and now is 60 feet, and now is 130 feet. Okay? So, third presupposition of capitalism, that it rewards hard work, right? that's mythical, regardless factors like sex, class, or ethnicity. Quite false. All right, thus excusing its penchant for producing sweatshops and abusive labor practices that take advantage of sex, class, and race in order to assure the widest possible ratio, right, of investment to profit. Okay, so long as progress, right, in quotation marks, continues to be tethered exclusively to economic measures, you can go down one now, to economic measures, progressive can be no more than a variety of liberal. It's neoliberalism with a kinder, gentler face. It's George Bush. Moreover, a finite planet cannot sustain the myth of endless resources without devastating consequences. Climate change is the barometer of human arrogance. It's the barometer of human hubris. And until we see that the anthropogenic causes of our planetary ruin, progressive will remain as doomed to reproduce heterosexism, racism, and speciesism as its enemies among the Trumpsters, with only one difference. We, the progressives, stand outside the walls of Rome or Cleveland while the city burns, offering bottled water to the survivors, while the climate change deniers, the religious, like Pence, right, the religious ideologues, and the CEOs of Chevron sip their wine, right, and cement bunkers. But the city still burns. Still burns. Okay, okay, and people end up living like this. So where that cow is, this is just a town. This is northern India, Mayaguri, India, little tiny town, and people living just under conditions that are just immensely difficult. I recommend to any of you, if you've never been to that part of the world, you learn about yourself in India. You learn what you can tolerate, and you learn a lot about what people and their animals tolerate. Because there's no clean water here. And this is the Darjeeling region. This is where all your tea is coming from. And there's no clean water. And the most recent evidence suggests that the Darjeeling region is going to, in the next 20 or 30 years, no longer be able to produce tea, at least at the rate that it does currently, right, which is immense. The Darjeeling tea fields are enormous. They go on for miles. But it's too hot. It's too hot. And there's too much dry. It's too dry. They can't irrigate, and the water's polluted. Okay. All right. So, fourth, and there's just 5 on this list. Fourth, I think that we need to rectify our failure to pursue climate change, species extinction, labor abuses, terrorism, things that may not seem intimately connected to these, homophobia, misogyny, and so on, at the level that specifically recognizes their global connections, right, which is part of the reason I'm showing you some pictures from just some other places, their global connections, and the demand for global level cooperation and sacrifice, right, which we're not very good at in the West, right, the whole sacrifice. We like the cooperation part, that's an easy soundbite. We're not much about the sacrifice part, right, because we're the great consumers. Among the things that left me the most demoralized and disenchanted with the Pennsylvania anti-fracking movement was the basic NIMBYism, the not in my backyardism, of its typical strategizing to resist the gas industry. And again, I say this knowing there are many exceptions, but this is sort of the tenor of that movement. The defense of property rights is fundamentally incompatible with the defense of planetary ecological integrity. Right? You can't do both at the same time. The reasons why, right, this got me to be very unpopular around the Holleran Sugar Bush debacle over the Constitution pipeline, because they were defending property rights, but not the ecological integrity of their trees, and so the trees got mowed down. Okay, property, let's see, the reasons why is because property is always going to devolve into mine. And ecological integrity doesn't divide along the fictional lines of mine or yours. Right? It doesn't have those sorts of borders. Ecology is not merely territory. The value of property is always rendered as a price.
right? It's bought, it's sold. Right? The value of ecological integrity is incalculable, right? Is incalculable and a necessary existential condition. The fundamental contradiction, moreover, is built into the premises of one of the most well-meaning and popular organizations. I think it's popular in New York, it's very popular in Pennsylvania, the Community Environmental Defense Fund, about whom I've been very critical. I have real interactions with them, and they're not cheerful. Insofar as it takes the community, right? CELDF takes the community to be a kind of collective property. It has no viable way of adjudicating conflicts between, say, a township that votes to invite in Crestwood or Williams Pipeline and a township that resists corporate incursion. Right? No way to adjudicate a conflict between a community that determines membership based on sex or race, right? Say a community that decides it's comfortable with slavery, right, or sex trafficking, and one that decries such criteria as bigotry. A world divided into properties is just as readily the Game of Thrones as it is a mosaic of democratic decision-making. And the concept of community rights is as easily conscripted to the right to produce township revenue via sex trafficking, puppy mills, factory farms, or uranium mining as it is through organic farming or decentralized solar power. Right? So I'm saying there's nothing special about the notion of the community or community rights that guarantees that its members are going to do anything like the right thing. Right? There's nothing that guarantees that, and CELDF doesn't address it. We can go down one more if you would like. And so this is back to the gigantic climate change march. Was anybody here there at the big march in New York City? This is September, a couple of years ago. Yeah, that was just a pretty interesting thing to be at. Right? So there's some folks. Okay, let's see. Last one. Okay, here's the last one. I think that we need to address far more thoroughly the endemic heterosexism and racism in the environmental movement in the United States. You don't like to talk about it, right? But it's endemic. Insofar as the American environmental movement has remained the polite province of overwhelmingly white and affluent organizations like the Sierra Club, the Environmental Defense Fund, the World Wildlife Federation, and insofar as a lot of its smaller groups down the food chain modeled their own activism after the big brothers, right? We were talking about this over dinner. You think you sign a petition, you think, I've done something. I feel good. I'm going to now go watch Wheel of Fortune. Right? You know, or you stand with a sign, you know, on the steps of Harrisburg, and God knows I spent a lot of time on the steps of Harrisburg holding up signs, right? And, you know, in your comfortable shoes and your khakis. Right? And you think, and then it's like, well, we're done. Okay, you know, what's next? Right? And it doesn't, and then we go home. And the gas companies are thrilled with this because we've exhausted our energy. You know, we feel like we've done the right thing. They can just continue on, and then nothing happens. Right? Nothing happens. Okay? Yeah, we reproduce both the internal and even in our smaller environmental organizations or grassroots groups. We reproduce both the internal hegemony of mostly white male leadership and priorities, and the external geopolitics of privileging the issues that affect their donor constituencies. Right? We still just do their stuff. Right? And I'm heartily sick of that. So we can see the value of revitalizing carbon sinks. Right? Here's an example. Right? We see the value. Right? This is the Environmental Defense Fund. Of revitalizing carbon sinks through, say, reforesting projects in the developing world. But we ignore entirely the cost to the farming villages that we displace when we replant the forest. Right? And we push them off their land. Right? Because we don't care. Right? We create techno-utopian coalitions, like the Breakthrough Energy Coalition that came out of the Paris Climate Conference, COP21. Right? The Breakthrough sounds great. Right? We're going to fix it all with technology. Right? But we sidestep any discussion about the egregious human rights violations of its member corporations. You can go down one. We endorse E.O. Wilson. Right? He's a really good scientist. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love this one. Yeah. Act like you live here.